Welcome to our community Bible study for Thursday, July the 15th, 2021. It's amazing, we've already gotten over halfway through this year, and time is a strange thing, but we keep moving forward. We today are going to finish the story about Noah and the flood, reading through Genesis 8 and 9. And I'm just calling this after the flood because we know that the animals have come to the ark, Noah and his family, they've all endured the time in the ark. And then we're going to begin the story of, well, what happens next? What's going to happen? And so may God bless us today as we study his word. Genesis 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month. And on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Let's take a break right at that point. I think it's interesting that the first verse says God remembered Noah. Now, I don't know that there was ever any doubt of God remembering Noah, but I think from a human perspective, being forgotten perhaps is one of our deepest fears. I read in a book recently a story where Mitch Albom, who is a sports writer, is interviewing the rabbi that he grew up with, and the rabbi is coming to the end of his life. And the rabbi says something about that dying with faith means that we are remembered, and that one of the fears people have about death is that they will be forgotten. And so I think that's true, that we are remembered. And so this is, I'm thinking of the purpose of the writers of the story, because they chose their words carefully. We have preserved for us those words, and I think it perhaps is more important than we realize that God remembers us. And here, God remembered Noah. He did not leave him abandoned. And then they got this sign of the tops of the mountains. And I have trouble adding up all these 40 days of rain, 150 days, and then the 7th month, the ark comes to rest, and then the waters recede until the 10th month. This is a long period of time here, and I'm not even going to try to add it up properly. But can you imagine the sign of seeing the tops of the other mountains? I'm sure there was some rejoicing in the ark over that sign. So we return to the text on verse 6. So after 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch, because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. Noah waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Another hopeful sign here. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him did you hear the progression? He sends out a raven, and I am not a bird expert, but I think ravens tend to be in trees, and I don't know if they nest in the trees or not. But so that was the first, and they found, okay, well, there was a place for them to go, and then the dove. But doves nest on the ground, and so here, the dove was the one who was going to let them know whether the ground was really becoming dry enough. And when he brought an olive leaf, they knew that, oh, things were beginning to grow again. The vegetation was returning, and so this ordeal was about to come to a close. Verse 13. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. So that's almost 2 months more before it was dry enough for them to leave. And if you can imagine, I mean, things don't just dry out overnight. And so it does take time. And they had taken food and supplies for all of the animals and the people into the ark. But when they would be let out, you needed to make sure that there was going to be at least the beginnings of growth and things for them to eat. So verse 15, then God said to Noah, Noah didn't decide on his own, he waited for God. Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply in the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives. All of the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on land, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Wow, the journey was over. And it sounds like this was an orderly disembarking.
Yeah.
You know, if you remember, God called the animals and they came to him in an orderly fashion. And so here, it sounds to me one kind after another could be just an expression, but I think it's a sign of God's orderly process in returning them to the land for a new start, a new beginning for both human beings and for all the creatures of earth. Well, verse 20. Then, what is the first thing Noah did? He built an altar to the Lord. He was grateful for his survival and for all God had done. And taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, remember they took more of them than just the 2x2. He sacrificed burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. That's the end of chapter 8. Never again will God curse the ground because of humans. And the wording of this is even though every heart contains evil. I think that I have underestimated the power of evil in different points in my life, probably when things were going well. And in the last couple of years, as perhaps I've been more aware of some things on the world stage, we've had a virus that's still going around the world that seems like it is evil itself. And the violence that seems to be increasing in not only our society, but in the world itself. And I have been very much more aware of the pervasiveness of evil. That does not mean that evil wins in the end, but it does mean we have to take it seriously. The possibility of evil from any human heart. God's covenant with Noah is chapter 9. Now, this is actually probably more important than the story itself, if I dare say so, because this is what it's about. You know, we have the record of the flood and all the detail about that for a reason. Not just because it's part of history, but because it is part of God's, the spiritual message that comes through that. So here is part of that about God's covenant with Noah. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and on all the birds in the sky, on every creature that moves along the ground, and on the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything." So God is saying, what in some ways he said to Adam, where you are now in charge of this world. You are a steward, you are over the animals. They fear and dread you. They know that you are superior. And then also, this seems to be a point in time where instead of just green plants for food, God now gives you everything. So we are now, instead of just vegetarian, we can be omnivorous, however you say that. But verse 4, but, there's always a but here. There's qualifications. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood in it. You're supposed to drain the blood from the meat. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal. And from each human being too, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. So lifeblood is important and is not to be spilled uncasually. There is a responsibility we have for life. And here we have verse 6. Whoever sheds human blood by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. As for you, be fruitful and multiply and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. So here there is if you shed human blood, then humans have their blood shall be shed. That's the price. Now as we get further along with the law, there are a lot more qualifications to these things. But that is, I think, a very strong statement for responsibility. That human life is not to be taken lightly, and life itself is to be treasured, and we should be responsible. So now verse 8. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you. That's the famous word that we will now carry on through the rest of our study. The covenant of God with his people. God says, I will establish a covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. So God's covenant is with all of his creation. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all earth be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on earth. So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on earth." Isn't it interesting? The rainbow is a sign to remind God of the covenant. It's also a sign to us of God's covenant with all of creation. So God has made this covenant not just with He and us as human beings, but with all of the earth, that He would not destroy it by a flood. You know, it's interesting. We do have it where it says man was created in the image of God. All other life, not in the image of God, but they received the breath of life from God. And we have the words that all creation was created good. So this flood is a new beginning to start over. And man's relationship, our human relationship with the rest of creation, gets a restart as well. So human beings are in charge, probably just by virtue of our being created in God's image, our mental ability. We clearly are here on this earth in a way where we are superior in many ways to the rest of the creation. But how do we handle that responsibility? Are we really good stewards? I've always appreciated what I've learned about the Native Americans in our country whose view of the natural world was and continues today as they try to pass on these traditions, but the appreciation of human beings, of how we fit in the world. It's like, if you fish, you keep only that which you would use for food, catch and release, so you don't deplete the lakes or the waterways of the fish. A good farmer who knows how to farm one area and lay fallow an area for a while so that it will continue to be there the next time. It's that relationship that when it's in order is a good thing, our human beings. But there are times when we human beings, in our selfishness or in our own lack of insight, exploit things and the earth, and we don't consider the fact that there is a consequence when we do that. I've lived in Florida, was born and raised here. I've lived here most of my life. I've always appreciated the springs and the rivers and the waters that we have. And for a long time, for several decades, people have been warning us about how we treat them and how we handle and how much water we pull out of the ground. And we are beginning today to see the real consequences of that, where the springs in Florida are getting algae growth that we're having trouble to deal with. We have areas of the state where you can't draw fresh water from the ground anymore. It's becoming brackish. And I read just this week where the number of manatee deaths in Florida has already exceeded the most number of deaths ever recorded in an entire year. And the previous record was several years ago when we had a hard freeze and many of them died in the cold weather. But they're saying that in the Indian River, not far from us, the Indian River Lagoon, that the sea grasses are not growing like they used to, and the number of manatee deaths in the Indian River Lagoon is a huge part of that. I know we have people working on trying to restore that waterway and do some things, but there are consequences when we're not careful, when we dump things, when we take too much, when we're not paying attention. And this was not meant to be an environmental lecture, but I do think that here God has given human beings a responsibility. And just as God gave Noah a new start, I hope we have some new starts in the way that we help manage the world around us. This is God's creation, and we are part of it. And we as human beings have a responsibility. So the rainbow in the sky, beautiful to see, but a reminder of our covenant with the Lord, of God's covenant with all of his creation. As the very first sentence said, God remembered Noah. He remembers you and I, both now and always. Amen.
Amen.